I am the Senior Director of the Artificial Intelligence and Intelligence Systems Institute here at Khalifa University. I've been working for many years in privacy-aware data analytics. So I feel particularly comfortable and happy to deliver a class on spatio-temporal tracking and tracing, which is something that has become very fashionable in this pandemic's period. But to start with discussing this topic, I would like to bring you back in history, long time before the pandemics of a virus. I will bring you back to the time of the plague. The time of the plague in Venice, many centuries ago. There was a very famous plague called the Black Death that killed more than 20 million people, 20 million Europeans. And so Venice is a port town, but not just a port town, it's built on a number of islands. So they wanted to keep safe from the infection. So what did they do? Well, basically, they knew that the infection could only be brought in by people on ships, people coming in. So they built a center in an island, one of the islands in the lagoons that are part of Venice, and basically, well, they used those to confine people for 40 days. So when people coming in from ships, they assumed they were sick. Maybe they were not, they were asymptomatic, as we would say today. But basically, the Venetian people were very sort of cautious, so they didn't want to run the risk. So they would keep them on an island. And on this island, they had to stay for 40 days. So the Italian word for 40 is quarantine. And quarantine is the word that we still use today, just to designate the period in which people to stay isolated in order to prevent an infectious disease to be communicated. And you see there were many ideas on how to keep people isolated. This is, you see on the right-hand side of this slide, is a picture of one cabin that was invented in Venice. You see that basically the dress of the guy who was inside the cabin is being burnt to be sanitized, and he will stay in there alone without any possible contact with the external world for his quarantine. So this is a method which is still very effective when you don't have a cure. The only way to prevent spreading an infection for which there's no cure is to keep the people who are infected isolated from the others. So this is the quarantine wisdom. But of course the quarantine wisdom is difficult to apply in an interconnected world like the one we live in today. If we take a look at the ideal scenario, well, if we had, we could make a few assumptions, which basically the assumptions are that we could test everybody at the same time, use a test that has no error. We could assume that everybody who is contagious will result positive to the test, and everybody who is positive will also be contagious. So if we could make these assumptions, well, we could do something similar to the Venice idea. We could test everybody at the same time, isolate the ones that are positive at that moment, you see that in the slide, and then these people could be kept aside from all the others, and the infection would stop right there. Well, this is an ideal, unfortunately, situation. Unfortunately, we can't. This is not possible. There's no test which we can do at the same time to everybody. There's no test that will give me the results all at the same time immediately. There is no way for me to immediately isolate the people who are positive in order to avoid them any further interaction. So this is an ideal world. And in the ideal world, we could use the Venetian trick, but not in the real world. So what do we do in the real world? What has been basically proposed in the real world? In the real world, what we actually do is called tracking and tracing. The tracking and tracing scenario basically is an iterative scenario in which we first isolate, or we first sample the population and we test them. Few of these initial samples will be positive, right? If they are positive, we will ask them, who did you meet in the last 15 days? or if we want to be cautious in the last month. Assume that they have a complete memory of whom they met. We can call these people in and test them. And we can identify if any of them is positive. If any of them is positive, we will repeat the operation. We will ask them for the list of the people they have met in the past month or in the past 15 days. Once we get that list, we call them in and we test them. So this is iterative. Of course, it's not as perfect as testing everybody at the same time, but it's the next best thing. And this is what we could do without computers, without mobile phones, without technology. But we would assume that people have an unlimited and perfect memory in order to be able to remember who they met during the past 15 days exactly. Even the people who passed by them in the street, closer though than the infection transmission interval. Well, this is unfortunately also something a little bit unreasonable. But it is an important anyway scenario because we can ask ourselves, what is the theory that tells us that if we had that, we could actually stop the disease? And there is a very interesting result that I wanted to show you here. This is a recent result. It is published on Science, one of the most prestigious international science journals. It appeared on the 8th of May, so just a few days before this class. And basically the Oxford group basically showed us that if we had perfect testing, knowing the complete lists would deliver effective tracing and training if we could get 70% or more of the population support, meaning that we would know about the encounters of at least 75% of the population. So the paper is actually much more complex than that, and it envisions a number of situations with different values for this percentage, called the coverage of the tracking and tracing. But generally speaking, it says that actually we could, if we had enough coverage, we could have an effective tracking and tracing system. We could basically adopt our iterative procedure, and as a result, in the end, we would have reached enough people to stop the virus infection. Well, this is the reason why a lot of international attention has been drawn by systems that promise to do just that, to use the technology to be able to compute and to exchange the tracing lists that list all the encounters that have been made by a single individual. And if the system delivers that and is installed in at least 75% of the phones of the entire population in a country, the country can hope that soon the infection of will be stopped via quarantine measures. Okay, so this is the theoretical background, but there are issues. First of all, well, one of the assumptions still we are making is that tests are very good, better than they are right now, even if they are improving. In a testing setting of today, you get an answer back maybe in a couple of days. Of course, tests are improving. There are tests that are coming close to an immediate answer, but in that case, you won't have perfect answer, you may be errors. Also, there is the issue that the system that builds the list of people that each of the members of the population have encountered may have some losses in its memory. For example, may fail to register a specific encounter. And this is the first set of issues that we have in this type of system. But also there are issues for privacy. Meeting someone is a transitive relation. If at the same time I meet you and you meet someone else, at the same time, it means that I also have met that other person, right? So you see, by registering the encounters list, if I make them available to the public or in a central location, well, people could also build the relationships of having met between people who are not positive. And so these people are entitled to their privacy. So we have two types of issues here, the issues of effectiveness and the issues of privacy. They both have to be handled, and the research has done a lot of work to try to handle them both. Let's see what they did, but first let's sort of summarize what we have learned so far. We have learned that we need the technology support, we need digital technology support for computing lists of encounters. So how can we do that? We can put an app into the mobile phone. The app into the mobile phone will just continue to broadcast a code. This code will change periodically, but for the moment, let's imagine that this code is just a random string. When two people meet, even if they don't actually meet socially, they're just sitting side by side, it's not important that they are aware of meeting. What is important is that their phones will exchange those strings. So each phone will basically be able to build an internal pair of lists. The list of the codes that it has sent to other phones when meeting them, and the list of the codes that it has received from the other phones that it met. So now we have these two lists. So suppose now that someone is tested positive at an hospital. Then he can deliver to the hospital the two lists of his or her phone. Alice, in this case, is delivering to the hospital the two lists that are stored in her phone, the list of her encounters in the previous 14 days. What will the hospital do? It can just broadcast those lists to everybody. In principle, I'm not saying that this is what happens in the current technology. I'm saying that in principle, the hospital could just broadcast this list. So suppose I receive this list. My phone can compare that list, the list of the people who Alice have met, and this is not the revealing Alice identity, is not revealing any of those identities. It will be a list of random strings. It will compare them with the list of the strings that I received from the phones of the people I met. And suppose there's a match, I will get worried, because it means that I met someone who has met a positive in the past. So I may decide to go to the hospital myself. It is as simple as that. The entire idea is devilishly simple. And it looks like to be able to deliver this capability of distributed knowledge of who has met whom, that is actionable, meaning that everybody who has met a positive can be notified in, let's say, in a short interval of time. Okay, so this is what we have learned until now. This is the basic of those systems. Is a scheme like this interesting? It certainly. Does it have issues? Yeah, it has. So I have prepared here a couple to the courtesy of a very eminent French colleague. He has prepared a few examples of social engineering dangers. The first one, the second one I actually adapted a little bit to the UAE. Let's say the first one. In the first one, there is a person who never goes out. Only goes out once per week to buy grocery. So what happens? This person only meets the cashier at the grocery store. And suppose it's a mom and pop a kind of business, so she always meets the same cashier. Now she receives a notice, meaning that she met a positive. Well, she knows now who is the positive that she met, and she may sort of disclose it to others. Even if what the phone has received is only an anonymous string of the code that the phone of the positive has generated, the person who only met one person can always guess. There is another more complex cases that I adapted a little bit to the UAE. Assume that there is one guy who is working in a construction team. So basically what happens is that he only meets the team members plus some people, maybe some neighbors in his building. So suppose that he gets a notice in his phone, but he is looking around and he is seeing that no one else is receiving that notice. Maybe it's an SMS coming in, he's the only one receiving this SMS. All his team workers don't. So he knows that none of them is positive. And then he can suspect, maybe wrongly, of a neighbor. The neighbor that maybe is a paramedic that he meets every morning. So again, there is a way to do some social engineering inference on the part of people involved in a scheme like this. So this is something you are not really happy about. But you could even imagine that someone could sort of use this system in order to establish a link between a phone and the target individual. This is not the individual who owns the phone. It's another individual. So I bring a phone close to someone, and then I put the phone away. So I'm sure that that phone only was close to that guy. If I get a notice on that phone, meaning that that phone was close to the phone of a positive, well, he is positive. So I could try to use some sort of a sensor network which is built using on the tracking and tracing system. Of course, this can be partly relieved because people shouldn't be able to have multiple SIMs. We can try to control this at the phone level, but still this danger of establishing a link between a phone and a target person is a danger that has been reported in the literature. So you see, it's not as easy as our summary sort of made it look. Now, so let's get a little bit a closer idea. So what are the points of that summary of the system that need attention? First of all, the positive status certification. We said that the positive guy will deliver his or her lists to the hospital, so to the authority, so the authority can broadcast those around in order to make the other people aware of the people that the positive met and to compare whether they can have met the positive person in the past. Yeah, but of course the positive status needs to be certified. We cannot leave someone to declare himself positive or herself positive without a sanction of the hospital authority. Because otherwise I could broadcast, I'm sick, I'm sick, I'm sick, just to make people scared. This is something we don't want to happen. So the list must be certifiable, in the sense that the source of the list must be certifiably positive. Otherwise, we are opening the door to vandalism, digital vandalism. Secondly, I discussed the system in a very simplified manner, and I mentioned that the hospital could broadcast the list. Broadcasting the list, of course, the list is composed of identifiers which are just strings generated periodically on the phones of people. But, you know, the crypto analysts are very, very good at trying to make inferences. So I don't really want the hospitals to infer. So in a practical system, what I would want is that my phone can connect and in some fashion can do the verification on a one-on-one, on a unicast communication with the hospital. I don't want the hospital to broadcast the list of Alice when she gets positive. I wanted the hospital to be available for everyone to verify whether in the list that they hold there is a positive. So it's a little bit more complex than we thought at the beginning. Now, what are the practical schemes? The research I told you that have been working a lot on these topics, and it had started working before COVID. So there are solutions that have been designed in the US. For example, at MIT, there is a famous project called Safe Paths. In this presentation, I would like to focus on the European research, because the European research results have been already implemented into apps that are being used in several European countries, or will start to be used very soon. So basically, we have two major families of schemes. The schemes that are called centralized. It doesn't mean that they hold in a centralized location the identities of people. It means that they hold in a centralized location the lists. So we will be able to, whenever the positive person is conferring the list to the hospital is not only broadcasting them or making them available for people to compare, but they are also stored locally. They can be used later. We will see how. In the second category, which is the one that has been most favored in the practical designs of the European apps that are being used these days or are starting to be introduced these days, is modeled after the DP3T algorithm, which basically does not keep the codes of the positives on the centralized server, but keeps some sort of secrets that can be used locally to recreate those codes. And I will go in detail on that scheme in a few slides. But basically, we know now that there are many available variations of this scheme that have been developed by the research worldwide and have been basically adopted by governments to create implementations. Okay, so I can't avoid to mention that the big companies that basically either manufacture the phones or manufacture the phone software and operating system have been collaborating with this, and they are basically available to host. For the moment, they are hosting the app, but in the near future, the operating systems of the mobile phones, mostly Android and iOS, will host the capability of generating and exchanging those codes, those opaque, periodically generated codes of the schemes that I mentioned before. So when it goes to at the operating system level, it means that your phone will become able to do that tomorrow when you will install the next version of the operating system. So here you see the notice that was published by, jointly by Apple and Google on the support for this function in the next versions of the operating system. Now, let's try to have a closer look, because the experts, I expected that they would expect something a little bit deeper than what they have heard until now. So I will try to provide now a little bit a dive in. Let's take a closer look. So the closer look will be mostly on the P3T. I wanted to mention that the PEP3PT is also a family of protocols which is greatly successful from the research point of view. And basically what happens is that the code, at least in some protocols of this family, the code is not generated on the phone, it is received from the hospital, from the central server. It pushes to the phones the identifier that the phones should use. So basically, that is broadcasted by the phone to the other phones that it meets. This gives to the server some capability to go and decrypt the pseudo-IDs. The DP3T basically claims to have an even stronger attention to privacy. Basically, what happens is this. There is a central server, but the central server doesn't hold any list, not even the list of the positive. When someone is positive, the positive will basically decide whether he wants to help the system. If he wants to help the system, he will basically communicate a secret, not the list, the secret to this central server. The central server will send around those secrets, and the secrets are manufactured in such a way that they allow the individual phones of the people who receive them to reconstruct the list of the positive person. So the reconstruction from the secret to the list is done on the phones. The central server doesn't know. And this is considered by the proposers of the P3T as being the extreme frontier of privacy preservation. Let's take a closer look to it. Before we go into the details of the secret generation and of how the P3T algorithm works, I would like to say a few words on how the codes are exchanged. Because when we say that two mobile phones exchange codes, people may think that they are using the mobile network. Basically, they are both connected to the mobile network, right? So they might be using the mobile network for exchanging the codes. No, this is not the case. They are using a device-to-device channel that has already been there for a while. This device-to-device channel is called Bluetooth Low Energy. And it has little to do with the Bluetooth that we use, for example, to connect headsets to our phones. It is just the pre-pairing part. During the pre-pairing, basically the Bluetooth devices are just, broadcasting out, I'm here, I'm here, I'm here, regularly. You see that on the right-hand side of this slide. This is intentionally done at the very low energy level, so it's not really impacting much on the battery. And it has been used, for example, recently by Apple to set up a peer-to-peer version of Find My iPhone that I'm sure many of you have used already in the past when you lose your iPhone and you want to know where it is. So, of course, we can locate it using the mobile network, but it is also broadcasting, I'm here, I'm here, I'm here. If BLE is turned on, and this beacon is called a beacon, this communication does not impact that much on the battery. So we can hope that people will let it on, will let it do work on their phones. So this is basically the Bluetooth Low Energy is a peer-to-peer, device-to-device channel and has nothing to do with the phone being connected to the mobile network. Okay, so let's take a look on how the two phones not only can exchange their codes using the BLE beacon, but also can compute their distance. They use this formula, and those of you who are telco buffs will recognize it. It's called the Fry's formula. Basically, it links the distance between two phones to the inverse square of the power of the signal that is exchanged between them. So this is not the signal from the mobile network, once again, it's the signal from the BLE, the Bluetooth Low Energy. It's not that precise, because to be precise, it should know the position of the two phones relative to each other, the directionality of their internal antennas. But even without being very precise, the inverse square relationship is very powerful in cutting long-distance encounters. It will only register and exchange the code if you are reasonably close. Let's say 1 meter, 1.5 meters. Okay, so now that we know this, we are ready for the final dive into DP3T. Basically, what we are trying to do with DP3T is to minimize the data stored around, but mostly to check whether someone has met a positive on the person-owned device, not on any other place. And to do it without the need for anyone to share the lists with the central server. Not even the positive guy needs to share the list. How does it work? Well, first of all, you have to bear with me. There's a little bit of technical detail now. First of all, the app which will create a key. This key is created on your phone, and it is created periodically. There are many ways to create key periodically. Here you see one which is based on chain hashing. I compute a function which is called the hash of the current key. I get the next key. And in this case, the generation and the sequence order is the same. In some cases, as in this picture, you see that the sequence order, generation and the use orders are the inverse. But in this case, it's the same order. So what happens? The period in which a key is valid, before the next one is computed on your phone, is called the crypto period of this key. During this crypto period, the key will be used to generate the codes. Let's take a look on how. You can see that formula there. It looks complicated, but it's not very much. The central server broadcasts a secret. The secret is used together with the locally generated key, the key that has been generated with the chain hashing that I showed you before. Together, they are used to generate a list of IDs, and the IDs are the one that your phone is broadcasting. The reason for this is that next time, this will also be used to regenerate the IDs of someone else, the positive guy. The slide shows you that when I do composition of the key with the broadcasted secret and basically the encryption that generates basically the long set of IDs, this is not really a composition as in a function composition. It is that one that is generating the keys for the other. This is something that the crypto buffs will understand from the slide. Now, what happens when Alice is ill? She is broadcasting, not broadcasting anything. She is going to the hospital and she is delivering basically her key, the local key that she has generated, and the time of validity. So this information, together with the broadcasted secret, is enough for each phone to regenerate the IDs that Alice had in her list. So the check can be done on the phone. The central server will not know anything about the list of Alice, not even the list of opaque identifiers. These will be the ephemeral identifiers will be regenerated on each phone of each person who will check whether those identifiers have already been seen in the past. And if so, it will get alerted by the phone. But I know it's my phone giving me the news. The hospital has no idea. Okay, then what we do? What do we do? Well, we could say, let my phone help me to compute the risk I am ill. Now what I know is that I met someone who was tested positive. But I know the distance, I know when this happened. Maybe I can use this to feed a risk model, and based on the risk I have to be sick, I could or not volunteer for testing or call in the authorities. Well, okay, so the risk, traditionally in a university we teach that the risk is the severity, meaning the damage that I can get from being ill, or conversely the damage that the collectivity might get from testing me for no reason, multiplied by the likelihood. This is sort of the probability of me being sick given the fact that I met someone who was positive in the past with a given distance and in a given time. And I'm not saying at a given location, because the encounters doesn't record the location where the thing took place, where the encounter took place. So we need also people are researching risk models, and which probability should I use is a topic of research. Here I have two types of probabilities listed, the frequentistic probability, the geometric probability. The geometric probability is very interesting here, because it is telling me basically what is the probability given the distance from the guy. So it has to do with the mechanism that the virus uses, the aerosol mechanism that the virus uses to go from one person to another. It is clear that 2 meters is not just decreasing the probability with respect to 1 meter of 50%. It is decreasing it much more, because the aerosol will only travel long distances under very strange conditions. So geometric probability is what the risk models are considering. Now, this is it. It's a notification system. We are trying to make the check on the phone of the individual potential user. We are not recording any geographical data. So you could ask, is there any way for the phone, which is checking, even with DP3T, the phone will reconstruct the identifiers. So is there any way reconstructing the identifiers to also find the locations where these encounters may have met? And this way to sort of be able for the phone that does the check to reconstruct who the guy was. Because remember, I will get notified that I met someone with COVID, but the phone won't tell me who. But if I can reconstruct where I met the individual codes that are listed in the list, and the list even with DP3T will be reconstructed locally, the positive guy list, I may try to guess. So the question is there any way to distillate geographical information out of this list? And the answer is unfortunately yes. Yes, there is way. There is way because, you know, collocation is telling you information. This slide shows you what is a collocation graph. Basically what happens is that I have all the list, but I can also basically check how many of those encounters took the cardinality of the number of people. How many of those encounters involved multiple people, not just 2. Maybe some encounters involved 3. You see that subgraph. So I am taking the IDs, the pseudo-IDs in my list. I am connecting them with a link when the meetings involved these multiple IDs. So I will have many of them, which will be just a connection between 2 points, because 2 IDs were meeting, myself and another guy. But in some cases, I will have also group meetings. So now the social scientist will throw these points randomly on a map, and then we'll use the cardinality, the fan out of these connection graphs to model an attraction force. And the attraction force means that those who met together were close. This is the information that we have. So now this can be used to cluster, to delimit the location of the meetings. Of course, it's not a precise geolocalization at all, but this is a study that can be done. This is an Italian colleague who did an exercise, interesting exercise for his students. I would like you to take a look at this exercise because we are coming close to the end of the class, and all the classes need to end with an exercise. So you're very welcome to try out this exercise. You generate 15,000 locations, 15,000 IDs, and then you map them randomly on a geographical map. Instead of mapping them randomly, just to check, you could map them in such a way that they will fall within a certain circle or a certain square. But you know this. The Alice lady who is going to try to localize these points on her phone doesn't know anything about how the encounters took place. So what happens is that she can run a software that will basically throw randomly over the map these 15,000 IDs. And you see these 15,000 IDs, you can use a map of, like my colleague did, a map of 1 square kilometer. Abu Dhabi, for example, is 1,000 square kilometers, so you could try to scale up this on a map of Abu Dhabi. But let's take just, a square of one square kilometer, and let's throw these 15,000 IDs randomly. Then we look at the only information that we have, which is, are these points group collocations? How many for these encounters involve multiple points? And we make them closer. We attract them. Of course, we could model that as a sort of an attraction force, which has a constant strength, like a spring, for example. But there are many more sophisticated models that the social scientists use. I'm only telling you something very simple. So what happens that then, after you apply that model, you can try to draw a line around your points that originally you had thrown randomly on the map, and see whether that curve that encompasses all of them is similar to the curve you used for generating them. And you will find out these examples that my colleague computed for his students, and that you can see on these slides. The answer is yes. So at least I can delimit. So there is a way to do some inference based on the degree of the collocations, and of course, if I knew something more, I could try to apply more sophisticated models. Now, we're getting close to the end. Of course, if I know more, so instead of having a grid of 1 kilometer, square kilometer, I have a map like this one of Abu Dhabi, I could try to use the map knowledge to basically make the model that is trying to infer where people met more intelligent. For example, I could associate the degrees of collocation, how many people took part of an encounter, to an area on the map, for example, which is a restaurant or a public meeting place. So this way I can try to improve the reconstructed location of those points based on the collocation information only. Of course, nobody can meet in the middle of the sea. If there are more than 4 people and I am in a quadrant which is 30% land and 70% sea, well, these 30% people who were at less than 1 meter of distance from each other, they were not gathering in the middle of the sea probably. So the inferences can be done based on the map knowledge. So the summary, where are we? We have a privacy notification system. The privacy notification system is built in such a way that the check is done on the individual phone. All the center knows are secrets that cannot be mapped to identities. The secrets regenerate on your phone the list of the encounters of the positive guy, and they compare it to the IDs that you have in your phone. And this way you can know whether you met a positive person. You don't know who the guy is and where you met it. Although some type of guesses, educated guesses on the where, can be done looking at the cardinality of the group encounters and applying some models and some map knowledge to them. But basically, this is a function that is good for the pandemics, but it will be good also for a number of behavioral control applications in the future. So when it goes at the operating system level, it will become a permanent fixture, part of our phones. Now, I would like to introduce as a final remark the difference between this type of systems and spatio-temporal statistics. In the spatio-temporal statistics, we are trying to elaborate data which are geolocated and time-stamped. The encounters are only time-stamped. They know when they took place, we don't know where. If we want to apply sophisticated spatio-temporal algorithms, we need to have an idea of the location. And we discussed a little bit how we can derive some location information from the encounters, but in that case, probably I might want to use data which are geolocated from the beginning, but those data will not be privacy aware entirely. So this is a different type of system which is called a correlation engine based on data which are fully geolocalized. Using correlation engine on top of the encounters-based software is somehow, let's say, awkward because the location information is not there. I can try to derive some, but it will not be of the right granularity for making statistical inferences on the geolocation. Let me finish with this example, which may be very, very important. You see, in this case, there is a guy who is positive. He meets a coworker and a friend. And then the coworker and the friend meet without him. Now, suppose that it's very important for reliability reason, for many reasons, to reconstruct the chain of causality. Was the second guy, suppose they all turn out positive, was the second the friend? Was he infected by the positive guy, the original one, or by the co-worker? So now we have two encounters, you see, and these two encounters make possible for the transmission of the virus to take place in two different moments. So can we guess the causality? Can we actually guess the right chain of events? Yes, we can. But in that case, we need the precise geolocation and the precise duration. So the spatio-temporal models that we are working on here at Khalifa will be spatio-temporal models that take into account geolocation information for making sophisticated inferences. The software we have been discussing until now is a notification system that allows maybe some side inferences on the result, but is mostly targeting at the notification. Okay, so thank you very much. This is it for the class, and I'm happy to answer questions, if any. Okay, I see that there are no questions so far. I don't know whether it was very clear or